Thank you. Please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Please join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Moving on to adopting our agenda, does administration have any recommendations?
President Bueno, our recommendation is that we adopt the agenda as it stands.
Thank you. I motion to adopt our agenda for our June 11th meeting.
This is Carmen Trujillo. I'll second the motion.
Roll call for Ms. Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
Dr. Alicia Vink,
Aye.
and Ms. Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to awards, recognitions, and announcements. We have one to share. We have our stellar OT and PT team. We have Asana Rahman facilitated the summer OT activities packs for almost 90 students and 55 tote bags full of hands-on motor practice materials for summer use with our students that have more intensive needs. And we have a video. Okay, no audio. Thank you. Two bags, 5 classes. How cute. Oh, they're doing tie-dye. Oh no. Oh. Okay. Isha. Oh. She's signing, thank you. Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. Thank you to your team, Ms. Elvis. All right, moving on to current event summary. Do we have any update from the superintendent?
We do. And that is absolutely priceless to be able to watch those children and to see what they're accomplishing. So we're very proud of our teachers and the work that they're doing for their students. It's hard to believe that we've only been out of school 2 weeks, but I am very excited to share that our summer programming for our students is going strong and our instructional leadership teams from every campus have been very busy. Last week, we had curriculum teams continuing to create the standards maps for all of our new ELA curriculum and a team working on the adoption of our social studies curriculum. They're developing criteria that we will use to select our new curriculum so that our students can see themselves, their history, and their communities represented. I'm incredibly proud that we have had so many teachers participating in this process. We also had an intensive training for teachers, support staff, and leaders from West Ed that looked at the research on how we can best support our English language learners. Since this is an important board goal, I am thrilled to be able to see that our PDC was packed last week with the staff attending this week-long training. And then this week, in partnership with Maricopa County School Superintendent's Office and the New Teacher Project, we have over 80 leaders coming together to look at our board goals and to learn how they can each impact positive student outcomes through instructional coherence. The energy and the focus in the room is palpable, and I really believe that we are all rowing in the same direction, backed by strong research to help ensure that we are able to support every learner to make the gains that we have set for them so that we are competitive with every other school in the state. And that concludes my update for this week.
Thank you for sharing. Do we have any board member reports?
Madam Chair, I don't have any long ones, but I just wanted to briefly say happy Pride Month and happy Immigrant Heritage Month. I got my kids and I an Ancestry DNA package. So I've been interested in it, but I thought it would be a good thing to help them recognize what the month is, and then, so we'll see how that goes. But other than that, no visits to schools or anything while we're out in the summer, but I do visit the little chickens often at Garfield, and I really hope they make it through this summer. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I don't have any reports other than just recognizing and celebrating Juneteenth and to stay safe and hydrated out there. Okay, moving on to student outcome focused governance, C1. Here's our grounding for our student outcomes focused governance framework. We believe student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. Here's an introduction to our SOFG governance model. Well, you'll see the 6 research-informed competencies. These competencies are things that the district is working towards aligning with our resources and achievements. And our board goals that we have adopted, our first 2 are focused on early childhood literacy and mathematics. Our third goal is covering our English learners. And our last 2 goals are around our middle school literacy and mathematics. Our superintendent guardrails has 5 guardrails. Next. And lastly, we have 5 board guardrails, and we will review guardrail number 2 later on in just a moment. We'll pass it over to Dr. Gonzalez for discussion on board goal number 1.
Madam President, members of the board, cabinet members, and our community, today is our first reporting on our goal. So far this year, we've been reporting on our interim goals, which are designed to be predictive of this goal. And so, as you know, in our progress monitoring for goal 1, which is our early literacy, We knew that we would be close, but we did predict we would not be able to actually hit our goal. And while I'm sad to say we did not hit the goal of reaching our next benchmark, we are showing strong gains and we have some good information that's helping us to drive the direction we go next. So Randy, if you will look at the slide deck and page 2, please. For progress monitoring goal 1. On progress monitoring for goal 1, we are looking at our goal, which was to be able to have students, the percentage of third grade students with a pass rate on reading as per the AASA will increase from 25% on August August 2023 to 40% by August of 2028. And you can see for each of the goal years, we have a target that we were working to achieve. What we saw in our data, if you look at slide 3, Dr. Lloyd is helping to make it very illustrative to see where we are. Our goal was to be at 24 or 28%. And you can see the red line shows we're actually at 23%. So we actually went down 2% this year. And when we looked at this data and when we looked at what had happened across the state and across the region, we realized these are the children who did not start kindergarten in kindergarten. Their first kindergarten experience and a face-to-face experience was after spring break. And in talking with our principals and asking, think about what was happening at that time, one of the principals reminded us it was also a time when even when they were face-to-face, they were frequently sent home for quarantining purposes. And so we prioritized their health and made sure that our students were in a place where we could protect their health. But unfortunately, they lost a lot of foundational learning in that period of time. However, knowing that, it's really going to help us rethink how we provide instruction to the students going forward, recognizing that we have a lot of ground to catch up, and what we have tried to do in a traditional setting isn't going to be enough to make up for this loss. And so part of that training that I spoke about in my report is really focused on how are we going to make up that loss and how are we going to focus? And we're going to talk a lot about our focus schools initiatives and how we're going to use that focus to really hone in on particular skill sets that our teachers need to have, our leaders need to have, so that our students get the outcomes that they deserve to have. So with that, I'm going to ask members of my cabinet. Dr. Lloyd is going to speak to us a little bit more about some of these data, and Dr. Ailshire and Mrs. Sims. So as you look at, and Dr. Lloyd, before I go on, is there anything you want to add to our first report?
Just one thing that I would add, members of the board, sorry. Thank you for having me here tonight. I think this also highlights the importance of us taking this year by year and cohort by cohort, because it's easy oftentimes we want to just set goals like, oh, well, last year we did this, so next year we should do this. But last year's third grade is different than this year's third grade, which will be different than next year's third grade, right? And so we have to keep that into account, both when we're determining what the needs are, how we support them, as well as often when we're looking at our numbers and how we set goals for these grade levels. So I just wanted to highlight that because it is easy. Most of the time we're like, oh, we want the line to always go straight up, and every year it's always got to get better. But oftentimes different cohorts are going to have different lived experiences. And so we have to adjust and understand those contexts to help us when we're making our decisions and setting our sights and vision.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. And so as you look at page 4, put my glasses back on. As you look at page 4, you can see that we have a lot of schools that are in the red, and the red indicates that they did not make the expected growth. But we do have some places that we have some celebrations. For instance, Emerson, went from 24% in 22-23 to 29%. And in our Herrera example, they went from 22% to 45%. Kenilworth went from 28% to 35%, and Magnet they did go down a little bit, but they're still at the expected growth targets. And Shaw also went down a little bit, but again, at the expected growth target for this grade. So we know that there are some things that are working, but what we really want to focus on are those things that need attention. And so one of the strategies that Dr. Lloyd uncovered in working with our teachers and trying to understand why did these particular schools show the gains that they showed, part of it was focusing on test familiarity, remembering that for third graders particularly, this is the first kind of assessment of this magnitude that they've taken. And so really taking time to not only build the familiarity of the testing with the students and the teachers, but also with the family members. We also talked about the need to provide intensive support early to build that foundational skills and the knowledge that was disrupted during the pandemic. Being able to diagnose students' readiness for different levels of instruction. And so a lot of work, we don't want to over-test students, but we do want to be constantly monitoring and assessing what they know and are able to do. And we can do that through informal surveying of what students are working on, and then providing the just-in-time supports that they need with that. And then focusing on supporting literacy at home, as well as our English language acquisition strategies for all learners. We know that those are going to be strategies that are going to take us further. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We had several questions submitted for this report. Our first question came from Board President Bueno, and it's understanding the importance of teachers and their impact. How are we helping principals ensure the teachers in the focus schools have the necessary attitudes, knowledge, and skills to support outcomes each year? And I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Ailshire to share.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, Madam President, Governing Board, Cabinet, our audience, and those tuning in at home. Thank you so much for being here today and for the incredible question, because this is something that we feel very, very passionate about. In my previous role as the Director of Principal Leader of Effectiveness, as well as in our current role right now, and picking up where the work that Dr. Gonzalez had done as Chief Academic Officer, we've really moved the needle in terms of what we expect our leaders to do and moving them from evaluators, where we are doing things to our employees in terms of evaluation, to coaches. This has been a term that we've been using really strongly for the past 2 years, that they are the head coach. In fact, we used that just today in our leadership retreat about their role as the head coaches on their campus. And coaching is very different in terms of than evaluation. Evaluation is something that you're checking a box. You did this, you did that, and I came in for this one lesson, right? Coaching is a full cycle, and we want our principals, our master teachers, and our LASs that are on the school sites to really be coaches on those campuses to really hone the success and the criteria that we want in our teachers. We know that the teachers that we're getting are increasingly not coming from our traditional teaching programs, and so we're taking it upon ourselves in a lot of cases to be the university to teach these individuals the best pedagogical practices as well as the best mindset practices. I also want to be blunt that teaching's hard. It is a demanding profession. And sometimes we find people that we want everyone to be successful. That's the role of the leader. We want everyone in our organization to be as successful as possible. And sometimes those coaching conversations are to empower teachers and to really push them forward. And in some cases, those are coaching conversations about where they can find success in other ways, in other places. That's not always easy. It's a challenging thing for our leaders to do, but it's something that we're continually working with them on to ensure that we are both empowering and supporting the teachers that we have, and also making sure that we're supporting the teachers that, and oftentimes need the greatest support. The last thing I want to emphasize is the notion of the irreplaceables. We've got teachers on our campuses that are absolutely the right leaders. We're surrounded by many of them in our leadership retreat right now. And the question then is also, how do we support those teachers, right? Those irreplaceables that are oftentimes the tip of the spear for the leadership that we have on those campuses. And so that's really the next reiteration of leadership that we're really excited about what coaching our principals on, is how to really support those future leaders that are on those campuses and making sure that their impact is felt beyond the classroom to their colleagues as well. So we're really excited for that work that we're doing right now. Thank you for the question. This is really important.
And so if we look at slide number 6 now, we'll talk a little bit about the pivot that we see coming. So when we look at the goal to increase from 25% to 40% by 2028, we've identified schools that are currently below 39% of the K-2 students reading on track. And what we want to do is increase that to more than 45% by spring of 2026. And so what we're doing is we're looking at that average growth area, as well as looking at the predictive measures of the benchmark assessments that we've been sharing through our interim goals. And we've identified 3 schools for whom these are particular benchmarks that we want to focus on. And those are Bethune, Edison, and Hurd. And so you can see what the focus school goals will be. We're still working on some of the interim measures that we will use, but as part of doing this, we realize that if we are asking our schools to focus, we have to focus as a district. And so one of the things that the cabinet did recently was to go through and list all the different initiatives that we have going on as a district. And if we couldn't attach it back to a board member goal, we said that's not a priority for us and we're going to get rid of that. That's allowing us to focus our efforts to provide better supports to our schools, particularly these schools in focus areas. And so you've heard us talk a lot about the science of reading, the letters training. That's going to be a strong continued focus, particularly seeing with this group of students coming up that they miss that foundational grounding in their schooling. So we're focusing on letters training. We're also focusing on providing, and this goes back to the guardrail of equitable allocation of resources. We're providing district-funded English language development coaching for those focus schools to continue to work on strategies to support English learners and supporting all teachers who work with English learners. And then finally, initiative number 3 is working on the family literacy events. The whole point of this is that throughout the system, we have different key points where the district is using its leverage to help support change in those adult behaviors so that student outcomes can change. And that leads us to President Bueno's second question. She asked, in recalling the presentations earlier from our Goal 3 interim goals, a strategy shared was showing families the format of the test to give them ideas to help their children feel prepared and less anxious. What can we learn from that to help all families give their children additional supports? And I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. Sims, who oversees our family and community engagement work.
Thank you. Good evening, Board, Madam President, Cabinet. Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to question number 2. So what we see are teaching is not a sole effort, right? We have a variety of individuals on the campus that we really need to bring in to help us meet these goals. And one of those really integral people is the family and community engagement specialist. And what we found is that some of the faces had actually shown some of those formats to families and kind of taken that this is the first time you're seeing the assessment out of the picture. We don't need kids that are anxious or feeling like this is a be all end all, right? This is just a barometer of how you've done throughout the year. So the more that we can take the anxiety out of that and share that with families, I think the more that it lessens the anxiety, and kids are really able to show us what they've learned and what they know. And so I'll talk a little bit more in the next question about the spotlights that we have planned for the upcoming year, but I'm really going to lean heavily on training the faces with their internal capacity to kind of share what they've done that's been helpful for families and students. And so we're going to carry that on throughout the year.
And as Ms. Sims alluded, we have a question from Board Vice President Trujillo. Please describe how family literacy and math events are expected to provide strategies and supports for families. She's wanting to know specifically, what do those look like? And so I'll let Sarah talk about this, but I'm going to jump into because it's something I'm personally very excited about.
She is. I was supposed to do the first spotlight and she invited herself to join me to do the first spotlight with the family and community engagement. specialists. Like I talked about earlier, we want to build capacity, right? If a face is doing something fabulous at one site, we want to make sure that all of the faces around the district are able to recreate that same activity. So our plan for the upcoming school year is to have what we call a spotlight. And each month when the faces gather, we're going to take a literacy or a math or maybe some other type of activity, maybe something with attendance. And we're going to replicate that as if you were presenting that to families. What would that look like? What would the materials look like? What would they take with them? Leave? What would the activity, literally, what are the steps? And then that will be ready for the face to take back with them to build kind of a library, if you will, so that they have specific activities. If they see that tier 1 instruction for phonics is something that they really need to work on, they can go into their repertoire and pull something phonics related that they can send home with families. And so those are some of the specific things. An idea with math might be the idea of manipulatives, right? We may create something, a baggie with die or with cards or something that they can do for enumeration that they're easy to take home. Families aren't intimidated to do with their kids. And it's a really nice way to just reinforce those skills that we're looking for in math and literacy at home. Does that answer your question?
Does that answer your question?
Yes, what I'm hearing is more that we're kind of training our face specialists to be able to put these things on at our schools. Is that what I'm hearing? Or
I'm sorry, they'll be presenting those at the Family Resource Center and then also at the school. So not necessarily putting it on them, but providing that if that's something that the campus feels is something that they should be focusing on.
I was under the impression we kind of did that already at some of our schools.
We have, and some of them do it extremely well. Other faces aren't quite as comfortable replicating those. And so that's what we really want to build is that that consistency and that really feeling solid. Many of the faces have said, I'm not an educator, I'm not a teacher, but I want to know how to help families. And so we're hoping that this will kind of build up some of those skills so that they feel more confident in helping families to do that or being prepared when families come to them with questions.
So do we have maybe like supports to like calendar these out so they can kind of plan for them and have a like a
Yes,
timeline
we're
of
going to
this?
do a spotlight each month. And so each face will take, Dr. Gonzalez and I are doing the first one. We're going to do a literacy activity and we'll model that for the rest of the group. And then they'll take that back and have that able to do with their families. And then each month we'll be looking at the goals and what we need to be targeting to make sure that the faces are well equipped to look at each of these goals.
Okay.
I still see questions. Go ahead.
Well, it's just the way I read it, when I first read the report, it sounded more, I guess, I was thinking it was more student,
Oh, in the classroom types of things?
like in the community, maybe, I don't know, having,
Can I
Yeah,
jump in
Go
here?
ahead.
So for the focus schools in particular, the family literacy and family numeracy or family math nights are specific for families and the children together. And so you may recall when we were doing the community outreach events and we had the baggies of goodies that the families came, they played a game together, they learned about what this was teaching and how it helped reinforce math concepts or how it helped reinforce vocabulary and literacy concepts. And then they had a baggie of things that they could take home with them. That's what we're trying to help all of our face specialists build. But in particular, when you're looking at the family math nights or the family literacy nights, it's not only looking at what can you do at home to support it, but it's similar to what we did in those outreach events where we'll actually take a look at this is how children in this school are performing. This is how children in our district are performing. This is how children at the state are performing. And Dr. Lloyd has done a lot of work with our schools in helping our students set goals for themselves. And you saw in a recent board report, the goal setting work that he had been doing with them. We want to continue that kind of work, but make it an emphasis at these focus schools and really help our face specialists become comfortable putting those events on at their campuses, not just at the focus schools, but at all the schools. But our priority is going to be focusing on this with our focus schools and building this kind of a repertoire of activities. We also, somebody shared a really great idea about putting these on YouTube And that's where someone else will do the video of the presentation and get on YouTube, but I'll be in the background cheering them on. But those are the kinds of events that we're talking about because we recognize that in order for our children to be successful, they need to have somebody at home. It might be an older brother or sister, it might be an auntie, it might be a neighbor, but somebody at home who's going to help reinforce this with them. And so they aren't feeling anxious when they come to school, but they're feeling like, I understand how to do this. This is fun. People care about me learning and understanding how to do this. And that's the atmosphere we want to create for all of our children.
Okay, thank you. That helps me kind of picture the end user and what, like from goal to the end of it. So let me ponder that for a bit. Thank you very much, everyone.
I did have a question. You kind of touched upon it. Dr. Gonzalez I was going to ask if we've thought how to integrate technology into this strategy. And I just heard you kind of identify using some type of videos to help keep that as like a database instead of having to like every year create something new. So that was kind of my question. But my other question is let's see. With us implementing this strategy, I just also wanted to raise the awareness of knowing the educational level that's already in the household, and then also being able to identify who can support in the household if it's not the guardians or parents. So I just want us to be
Yeah.
mindful of that
Thank you for
too.
bringing that up. If I could address that as well. One of the other things that we're very aware of is adults and caring adults want to be involved, but they're not always able to make our events, right? They're working, they don't have transportation. So we understand if devices are in kids' hands, that's a really easy way that families can still access that. And so we want to be cognizant, and we spoke about this today at the leadership. Kindness is clear, right? We need to stop using acronyms. We need to be very clear with what is phonemic awareness? What does that mean? Those are really high level terms. And so when we're talking to families, we want to make sure that we're expressing these kinds of things in a language that everyone, not just an educator, would understand. So I think that's really important, is making sure that when we do film these, that we're really thinking about the audience broadly and how we can make sure that we're speaking to the masses. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. And then
Mhm.
also just for clarification, our family literacy and family math nights are the Title I nights? Or we have different events?
Those would be different events. So they're in addition because we know that we need more in these particular settings.
So then how many events do we typically have throughout the school year?
It would vary at campuses, but typically we have a family a night through Title I and a back to school night, and then that might be it. So we're trying to make sure that we're increasing those nights. Our goal would be to have 3 to 4 at each focus school as a minimum in terms of the big events. But then because we're working with the family and community engagement specialists, that they would be ongoing whenever a family wanted or needed, it's ready and available for them.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, so our next question is also from Vice President Trujillo, and she's wanting to know about the vision of administration in coming up with this theme of focus schools. And so she was curious about what are the perspectives of the students and teachers that administration considered in identifying these focus schools, and what is the time frame and the data that we're using to identify these schools. And so I'm going to turn this over to our research person, Dr. Lloyd, to talk a little bit more about that methodology.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. So what we want to do is make sure that we were basically identifying schools that had the highest need in each area. And obviously some of the schools have high need in several areas. And so we're trying to be strategic about also what resources are currently available to them, what resources they may need and may best help them with making that improvement at their campus. And so we looked at several years past data, both for the interims as well as the state assessment, to try and determine where we see some of the highest needs, the most students that could benefit from the resources, the additional resources and focus. And we used, in this case, Specifically, we went to the winter data because that's like our halftime, right? And so we want to make sure that by halftime, we're in a good position so that the second half of the game or the year, right, we can be where we need to be and win or have the outcome that we desire. So the first half of the year is what we're really focusing on right now with setting these and also determining the schools that we really want to target to make sure that they have the highest amount of growth during the first half. That's usually when we see the highest amount of growth as well. And so we looked a lot at the needs there and those historical data. And then we looked at what our theory of action might be to help support improving those schools by selecting certain schools instead of trying to help all of them, because many of them have very high needs. But by being able to focus, not that those schools that we focus on won't still have goals in the other areas, but we're able to provide additional support and resources there in the specific areas that we targeted. So really it came down to looking at where we could have the greatest impact on student outcomes at the end of the day, because we know that that's what we're really trying to improve and target. Anything else, Dr. Gonzalez?
Yeah, I will just add that this focus is designed to really provide a clear target for our schools who are in these situations to be able to understand what they can do to change outcomes. And we keep going back to the notion that adult behaviors have to change if we're going to get different student outcomes. And so looking throughout the system to identify where at each level are we able to create levers that are going to change those behaviors. And we're not changing behaviors because people are ill will or ill-intended. We're changing behaviors because they don't know something different. And so for us to be able to target that, not only do we anticipate that we'll see gains in the focus area, we know that good teaching, when it's done well and consistently, is going to have benefit across all subject areas. It also allows schools to continue to showcase for one another the things that they're doing that are working. And so in the past year, we started the programs where our principals get to visit each other's schools and see what's working and why it's working. And they get to see the professional learning community in action, or the data talks that the principals are doing in action. That is going to have a ripple effect for our other principals as well. So we really believe this is going to be, and going back to Dr. Ailshire's focus on the coaching, that coaching aspect of all of this is going to have a ripple effect for all adults in our system. And that's part of what we're trying to do. If you were not identified as a focus school, it doesn't mean that the district isn't supporting you or giving you resources. It just means we're targeting more resources to those schools with need, as opposed to everyone gets exactly the same, because that's not serving the groups that need it most.
Madam Chair, I just have one, it might be a question, I'm not sure yet. Thank you for the extra information. With this framework, that is something that I try to remember, is that when dealing with our goals, I associate our vision with it. So me being able to ask what your guys' vision is helps me kind of pair those two things together. And then when we talk about strategies or interims and guardrails, we can figure out, I can see and piece out where our values are. So that's why I need to know what these things look like and ask what the vision is. So it helps me kind of compartmentalize just where the greatest impact is, just basically what you guys are looking for. But it helps me understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. So I appreciate the extra information.
Well, and I appreciate the questions, because I do think we have to remember that we have an audience of people who are watching this and listening to this, and we have people in our schools who are also wondering, what is all of this about? And we have the luxury of being able to talk about this, well, for us, for staff, on a daily basis. For us as members of the governing board and the cabinet, we're living this, and this is a big part of what we are about. But for many of the people in our systems, they don't always get to have this constant dialogue around this. And so, as Sarah said earlier, clear is kind. And the more that we can add clarity to a very complex system, and the more we can use salient points and examples that will help people go, oh, I see what they're saying now, the better we're all going to be able to wrap our arms around this. And honestly, the work that we've been doing in the past couple of weeks with our staff and always being able to tie it back to board goals has been incredibly powerful because people have a sense of where we're going and why this matters. And we tied it back, not just, it doesn't matter, and this is in no way meant to sound disrespectful of the governing board, but it's not because you set these goals, it's because you believe these goals lead to equity for all children and all families. And that's what matters to us. And so when we're able to tie it back and say, these goals are important, but these goals are important and we're having to focus differently, because this is about being equitable in terms of the ways in which we provide resources to our students so that our students all have a fighting chance to succeed. And that's what really resonates with everyone. So we appreciate the questions and we appreciate the opportunity to come together for something as audacious as this. So we have another question from Vice President Trujillo. In what ways are we supporting testing experiences for our students, and what do students typically experience? And I'm going to assume in our response that this is typically experience in our school district. We can't speak for other people's lived experiences. But again, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Lloyd. And before I do, I'm going to share some background. When we first came into this work together, unfortunately, we had many testing violations that had to be reported to ADE, and you may remember that from board updates a few years ago. And we had tests that were invalidated because we were not following appropriate testing protocols. We also knew that our students were not getting frequent opportunities to take an assessment to understand what it looked like, or if they were, it was just, here's this test, do this test now, and it didn't come back to them in any way, shape, or form, so it had no meaning. When Dr. Lloyd first experienced this in his role, he took this challenge on and said, we have to do better for our students, and he took on almost a vigilante attitude about, we are going to make sure every child has a fair testing environment and that the testing conditions are set so every student has the opportunity to show best what they know and understand. He also made a concerted effort to say, we're not going to test as frequently, but when we test, it's going to have value and meaning for the students. And so I'm going to let him share some of the things that he's added, because this is another point of pride for me getting to work with him to see what he's done to change the testing environment in our schools for our students in the ways that he's supporting them and their teachers.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. That was very gracious and kind. I don't have a cape, but I do have 2 pairs of cheese socks that I wear to get around and take care of business. So that's just a fun fact. So the 2 things that I'd like to highlight is, one is trying to improve the consistency and the fairness of the test administration experience across the district for all students. The other piece is the preparation for that experience. I guess there's a third piece too, which is the celebration of that experience and honoring not just the result, but the process and the behaviors that we're seeing and the effort that we're seeing. Because oftentimes a huge win for a lot of our students is a marked improvement in the level of effort and in the behaviors that they demonstrate, right? They've changed their behaviors, and that shows that we've done work as adults to change our behaviors to help them. And so some of the things that in recognizing that we had some issues with our test administration this year, I'm very proud of the work that all the schools did to really create a team effort. Many of our schools did both. They sent and created messaging and had things to support it at the school level, right? By having assemblies, by ensuring that students understood what we were trying to do, what the expectations were, but then also in each classroom with teachers, we did try and make sure that all students knew how they did on their previous assessment, because oftentimes just knowing that, what their previous best was, so that they can try and improve from that and move forward, and trying to recognize what they've done this year, because they've done a lot of work, and the assessment is one piece of that, right? It's one way of measuring the progress and what they've done this year. And so helping them connect their inputs and outputs, right, to these results. So they recognize the importance of what they've done, the efforts that they've of coming to school and putting forth and doing the work that they've done. We also have worked on creating better ways of monitoring what's happening in the classrooms during assessments. And so in addition to improved training, we have established and made sure that we have things like adult testing logs where every adult that enters a testing room has to sign it. And we know all of them have come in, and when they've left, we have a quality assurance form that we go through as site support teams and the school test coordinators to review and observe and make sure. And that's not a gotcha. It's to give feedback and ensure that we've got everything and are doing things all the right way to make sure that the administration is consistent and all students have a fair opportunity. And then in terms of that preparation, we continue to try and improve, giving students opportunity to take sample tests, to share the links and the resources with families. And then, like I said before, also to try and celebrate. We've created student certificates to try and celebrate those who are growing at the rates they need to and hitting their targets, and celebrating those both at the student level, at the class level, and at the school level. And so we're excited to do that and to celebrate that with them. And I think that's the end of my answer. Do you have any other questions?
Can I just add something really quickly about the importance of the celebration? The celebration, they get these certificates and Dr. Lloyd and I signed them, and I went into a classroom at the beginning of the year, and the student I was introduced, this is Dr. Gonzalez, and the kids are doing their own thing, and this little girl looks at me and she starts rummaging through a folder like, oh, okay. And she comes up to me holding her certificate that she had received the year prior. And she said, "Is this you, Dr. Gonzalez?" The certificate meant so much to her, and that somebody signed that for her, acknowledging her growth. And I don't think we can ever underestimate the importance of those celebrations for our students.
Thank you both very much. I can't tell you how much I personally value the predictability and removing uncertainty from situations. It helps alleviate so much of that stress that I can think back to when I was testing, and it was like the worst thing in the world to me. It was just the quiet, having all your things, like your stomach's growling, and it's like just you can't wait for the day to be over. You're not focused on your test. So those are where those things come from. And during my college experience, I got to lead a few things for our student organization, and we would bring puppies in on testing weeks because, there's just, so those are the things that went into my thinking of like, what are our processes and what do we do differently? So that's where that kind of stems from, and I'm really excited to hear it. It's been a long time. We've been listening to Dr. Lloyd's experiences with our kids testing and how much we've grown from them. I'm really just so pleased and not surprised at all that this is where we're at and where we're headed. So I'm just super grateful for the explanation and the good vision that I've got now. Thank you.
I'll share one more quick thing that I'm very proud of, is that at every school this year, we made sure and identified all students who needed accommodations either for language or otherwise. And I saw a marked increase in the number of students being able to use translation dictionaries to help them, students receiving in multiple languages translated directions, including last year I wrote to the state and we were authorized, and this year we've continued to provide it in whatever language it is through the language line, using the protocol that we wrote for the state to be able to do that. So students at the very minimum can hear the directions in their own language before taking that assessment. And so it's a great thing to know that, again, we're trying to ensure that equity and opportunity for our students, especially those who are most marginalized oftentimes.
Thank you so very much.
And we have one more question from Vice President Trujillo. Her question is asking, what are the class size and teacher ratios, and what is the impact of these ratios on supporting student success on the AASA? So Dr. Lloyd has some data that he pulled for us today, and then Dr. Elshire will elaborate a little bit more.
So I'll just share some percentages really quickly. So in looking at our homerooms, by homeroom, how many students tested, we had 42% of our classes had between 10 and 19 students. So that's below 20 students for nearly half of our classrooms. Another 43% had between 10 to 25 students. So in general, 80+% of our classes have less than 25% or 25 students. And then we did have about 15% who had 25 or more students. In several of those classrooms, it should be noted that they have additional adults to help as well in those cases. So those are some of the numbers.
So in regards to the impact that that has, it's everything that happens leading up to the assessment, right? And the ability to have a smaller group class, the research is clear that is actually a really powerful input. It allows teachers to differentiate their instruction greater, allows teachers to group their students in variable ways, allows for greater access to small group work and groupings. These are best tier 1 practices, and these are all things that we're actually working in our leadership retreat just now to really codify and be able to do. I want to put a double-edged sword on this, which is when you have 19 kids, every student matters, right? When you're having, when 2 students make up a difference of 10% of a total classroom, it's really, really important. So it really adds that sense of urgency that when we have classrooms this size, yes, it is very powerful for our instructional practices. It allows us to take good tier 1 practices and be able to implement them more effectively, but it also means no student gets forgotten. We really need to emphasize that with our teachers. It's something that our principals take very seriously, because every single student always matters. But when you're really dealing with that small of sample size, when 1 student, 2 students, 3 students are not mastering the content success, we see that in the data. It becomes very clear. It's something that we've pointed out multiple times as we've gone through these. So it's something that we really want to make sure that we're always cognizant of, and making sure that every student's needs are met in all the different ways that they need to be.
One more question just popped up in my head. I'm wondering for the older grades, maybe, or I don't know, I'm not an educator, maybe for everyone, but at some point, do our students get to see like how their classroom is doing compared to like state averages or what we did district-wide last year, like with just generalized stuff, no identifying information on there, but like, do they ever get to see that kind of thing? Be during family literacy nights or something?
So at the Title I night, they do get to see they see grade level by district and by school. Because our schools are so small, their grade level is their classroom in a lot of cases. But I don't know that we have gone to the level of depth that, like Magnet, for instance, does the APTT, where they actually look student by student, and this is how I compare to my classmates in my class. And that's at a much more granular level. That's the kind of work that we do want to begin doing through the work of the family literacy nights and the family math nights, that kind of deep dive into this is how your child is performing, this is how your classmates are performing, and helping them to set goals. And here's some strategies you can do at home to help you reach those goals.
And what I can personally attest to in the work with our leaders and what I've seen in walkthroughs is that a lot of that work, that sort of seeing themselves and where they represent the data versus class and growth, we see a lot of that being done in the benchmark. So when leading up to the AASA, those benchmark assessments, which have proven to be incredibly predictive of where students are going and what they might end up doing on the AASA, we see a lot of that work in terms of students being able to chart their growth, chart their progress, see where they stand. A lot of that is the work that leads up to the AASA as well.
I did have one question I forgot to ask Ms. Sims. What you when you were introducing your strategy around family literacy support, you kept using the term spotlight. Can you please define and share?
Yes. I talk about kindness is clear, and then I use a term that not everyone is familiar with. So thank you. So the spotlight is just a term that we came up with so that we can spotlight certain things that faces are doing really well, something that they feel strongly about. And so that's going to kind of be our internal name for the system in which we train each other. And we were looking at a way to kind of revamp the family and community engagement specialist meetings so that it wasn't someone standing up and lecturing. We talk all the time about finding ways to teach to adults, right? And so having someone be the expert and model those behaviors for the rest of their peers is what we're going for. So the spotlights will be monthly. Anyone's welcome to come and see those. And then we're also planning to keep those on video so that we'll have recordings of all of them.
Thank you for the clarification. I
course.
didn't want to assume I knew
No,
what it
thank you
was.
for
but-
asking.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for board goal number 1? Okay, just to recap, what just happened was that we discussed our board goal number 1. Our goal is the percentage of third grade students with a pass rate on reading as per AASA will increase from 25% on August 23rd to 40% by August 2028. What we found out today was that after a year of progress monitoring, we did not hit our goal. And a matter of fact, we decreased 2 points. So our third graders are at a 23% proficiency rate. And what administration just presented was the pivots that are going to take place for this upcoming school year by focusing on our focus schools and updating the interim goal. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. And with that, moving on to approval of student outcome focused governance progress monitoring report of board goal number 1. I motion that we adopt this monitoring report.
This is Carmen Trujillo. I second the motion.
Roll call for Ms. Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
Dr. Alicia Vink,
Aye.
and Ms. Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes and we have adopted our progress monitoring report for board goal number 1. And we're moving on to superintendent guardrail number 3.
Madam President, members of the board, cabinet, and our audience, Superintendent Guardrail 3 is another interim goal monitoring of my guardrail. Guardrail number 3 says that the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without a system designed to recruit, employ, and retain diverse staff who reflect the community and meet the needs of our urban district students and their learning environments. And I want to speak specifically to this because one of the points of pride in working today with the 80 or the more than 80 leaders at the district retreat was the diversity of people in the room. And we are offering an opportunity to develop a cohort for teachers and leaders to go through a doctoral program. And in that doctoral program, we, when we advertise that, the people coming forward and saying, I want to work on that, I'm interested in that, I'd like to have more information, were 95% of them were diverse members of our community who look like our students. And as you look around the room, we are increasingly having people who look like our students and our families represented in leadership roles. And that's a really exciting aspect of our community. And I'm very, very proud of the work that's been done prior. This was not work that, you know, we can necessarily say happened this year, but I do think it's an important goal for us. So as we look at the guardrail, I want to start by looking at our theory of action. When we think about this guardrail, the inputs to this are that we need to have incentives to retain staff. And so part of the work around this guardrail and the interim goal was to start having meetings with the associations to support diverse perspectives. And then also to have competitive salary that attracts and retains talent. This is meeting with the associations to support diverse perspectives is important because while the meetings may have occurred in prior administrations, the feedback I had when I started was that the meetings were either canceled with a high degree of frequency or cut short or nothing that was discussed was carried out as a result of the meeting. And so in attacking this guardrail, I really wanted to make sure that that was not something that they experienced further. So when you think about that being the input, the output is that we have greater retention of staff in all of our fields, and that we have pride of recognition that all voices are honored, and that staff are at or above the 60th percentile of the midpoint range. And that was an important goal that was set through the compensation study. Then with the outcomes, of course, that's the increased satisfaction with Phoenix #1, increased diversity, and a higher retention and greater numbers of qualified candidates applying. And so that is work that we've definitely been focusing on this year. So when you look at this, our interim goal for this guardrail was that by May of 2024, based on feedback from our employee, our ESPA group, which is the Educational Support Professional Association, the district will reverse the current longevity stipend, which is placed in the base, to return to a one-time lump sum awarded in December. This will reflect 0% of classified employees who are qualified receiving the lump sum stipend in December of 2023 to 100% of classified employees who qualify receiving the stipend in December of 2024 as measured by payroll records and employee satisfaction. And so let me back up a little bit and talk about what that was. When we started the compensation study, we had moved to move all stipends into the base because we figured that would be a way that we could make sure that people's salary, their base salaries would increase and would increase in perpetuity. When we met with ESPA, they said, we recognize that that is helpful for us to get more money when you add a percentage to the base, when we get a percentage base increase. But for us, having a lump sum in December in particular is really critical because it may not be a lot of money, but it's enough money for me to buy Christmas presents for my children. It's enough money for me to buy supplies to make tamales for my family. It's enough money for us to drive to Mexico to be with family. And those were some of the examples that are, and I'm looking at Dr. Bowman because he sat in these meetings with us. And these were the examples that they gave and why this was so important to them. So in hearing that, we all agreed that that was an important change that we needed to make. So we made that change. And we, in doing the work, our payroll and our business services team realized that in the long run, giving them back the stipend was going to be very meaningful for them and giving it back to them in this period of time. If we had gone back and taken away, and I can't remember the amount, it was pennies on the dollar that we were saving by keeping them in the base. And we decided to keep that longevity stipend that we had put into the base in their base salary because that was what we had agreed to, but then also going back to the notion of giving them the longevity stipend. So in this process, they did not lose the base increase, but they did gain a stipend that they will receive for longevity, and that will be going forward. They will be able to receive that.
I appreciate you being receptive to the feedback. I think that was the main concern of when the compensation study was adopted and implemented, was that there was no communication about what the change was going to be, therefore not really knowing what the unintentional impact would have been to individuals. So thank you for continuously meeting with ESPA and PECTA to making sure that all our employee groups are satisfied.
Absolutely. And I don't think anything was done with ill intent. I think it was just an assumption that this would be good. And so I'm happy to know that we're doing what is right. So I do want to share though, because these are really important aspects of the work, and in listening to them, one of the other aspects was designing the infographic. And so our communications team along with Cabinet, put together a really thoughtful infographic to help explain how the process worked. And as of March 21, 2024, we have support services staff who are now eligible for that longevity stipend that will be paid as a lump sum one time in December. And then the other is offering the $100 acceptance incentive stipend to all employees who accepted their work agreements by the end of business day, on the day after or the week after they got their work agreements. And then we're also thrilled to share the great news for 24-25 that all eligible employees who return to Phoenix #1 will receive the last of the ESSER stipends, but it will be in the amount of $5,000 as a retention stipend. And of course, this will be prorated for FTE before September of 2024. So if I'm part-time, I would get the part-time equivalent of $5,000. But that will be the last year that we're able to provide that stipend. But as we go forward, we wanted to make sure that people are really clear about what the next phases of the compensation study are. So phase 1, we identified the market competitive rate and moved as many people as possible to that level and began bringing new employees in at that level. Unfortunately, when we moved people close and then we brought people in at that level, it created a condition that we termed leapfrogging, because that meant somebody who had been here longer now got leapfrogged by somebody who was coming in new. So at the second phase of that, this is where we had the equity bump, and we were able through very careful monitoring of our budget and being able to look at that, we were able to do that earlier than we had originally anticipated. And so phase 2, we actually did the equity adjustments, and the board voted to approve that in late December so that those were realized by our employees in January. Now, it still wasn't perfect. And in working with our compensation study, the consultant kept reminding us that it was going to be a 3-year process to be able to do that. And largely not because of the math or anything like that, but largely because we have to make sure that anything we change, we can sustain over the long haul. So we want to make sure that everything we're doing is actually fiscally appropriate to keep the district in good standing. And I'm grateful to our business services department and Alicia Mena, and also to Dr. Bowman for the work that they've been doing in helping us do this analysis of staffing. So in phase 3, and what you're going to see on the consent agenda, is that we've been continuing to do cost-cutting measures throughout the district. And pending your approval, employees at the lowest salary level will be able to move closer to the midpoint. Everyone will be in the midpoint. Some people will be middle of the midpoint. Some people will be end of the midpoint. Some people will be beginning, but we're going to get everyone at that midpoint. And then if you, or you will get a cost of living adjustment. And what you will get will determine, you will get whatever moves you closest to the highest range of the midpoint. So if I'm going to use very simple numbers to explain this. If I earn $10 and the midpoint range is $12, I can either earn a cost of living adjustment, which might be $1.50, or I could earn $2, which will move me into the midpoint. You would get the $2 because that moves you closer to the middle point of the midpoint. Dr. Bowman, how did I do?
Of course, I'm going to say you did fabulous.
Did I explain it accurately?
Just, it's important to know that we're moving people as close to the midpoint as we can. Not everybody's going to get there yet, but they will get there. But this year, we're doing a great job of accelerating, especially the low wage earners. So that was part of the model that was presented to you last year. So we're excited to be able to offer that to our employees.
And our priority is focused on moving as many people as possible to that midpoint, or not to the middle of the midpoint, but at least to the low end of the midpoint.
Yes, thank you all for your hard work and effort. It really does go a long way to show how valuable our staff is.
And that concludes my presentation on guardrail number 3, interim goal.
Thank you. Next, we have the approval of the progress monitoring for superintendent guardrail number 3. Oops, I didn't ask. Did anybody have questions for superintendent guardrail number 3?
really quick question. Dr. Bowman, you mentioned that we're kind of, I don't know really if I understood it correctly, but going in like a phase, like some are getting done, some will get done later kind of thing. What is the full timeline on that? Do you have a deadline to get these in by? Did I miss that part?
Any of those decisions to accelerate people more towards the midpoint are budgetary dependent.
Okay.
So it's going to depend on the amount of funds that we have available each year to move more people towards that midpoint. So there is no answer to the exact timeline. We're going to do as much as we can every year with the budget that we have that's available.
But we're starting from our support staff and then are we kind of working our way?
It's
up?
all staff. So
All
we
staff.
look at all staff and how far away they are from the point. So everyone's treated it equally that way, where we're looking at an equitable distribution of the funds that are available.
Interesting.
Did I confuse you?
It's not you, I promise that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, don't.
So
don't
if
apologize.
this is the midpoint right here and I'm right here, we're gonna try to accelerate you
Yeah.
to that midpoint. The meaning of the midpoint was when this study was done, that represents the 60th percentile of our neighboring and surrounding districts. So we want all of our employees to be there as soon as possible so that we can fulfill that competitive advantage that we're wanting to have for all of our employees.
Got it. Okay. So no end goal, it's all budget based. So I think that was what I needed. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, hearing no other questions, I motion to approve the progress monitoring report for the superintendent guardrail number 3.
Alicia Vink, so moved. I second it, whatever you want.
Vote call for Ms. Jessica Bueno,
Yes.
Dr. Alicia Vink,
Yes.
and Ms. Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, the progress monitoring report passes and we are moving on to board self guardrail number 2. The board guardrail number 2 is attaining the board's board's student outcome goals. The board shall not allow during regularly scheduled board meetings to spend less than 50% of its time progress monitoring the board's student outcome goals and or superintendent guardrails. Alrighty, so I have the results from March. The last time we reviewed guardrail number 2 was in March. So from March, April, and May, I have the percentages that we spent. So in March, we spent 46% of our time focusing on student outcome, progress monitoring student outcomes or guardrails. April, we spent 41% of our time. And last in May, we decreased to 25%. So seeing how we were doing so well in the first couple of months and seeing how much of our focus in May lacked, I did want to maybe suggest that we move our celebrations before the board meeting. That way it will give us a little bit more time to interact and celebrate our staff and students. And then removing that from our agenda. And I know that Dr. Vink had suggested this a while ago. So thank you for forecasting this initially. Any discussion? All right. So we will work on readjusting our agenda. So we'll start this obviously when the school year starts, right? Okay. And then, so that was the update for our board guardrail number 2, just being cognizant of how much time we're spending at our meetings. And now we move on to our board self-evaluation. Okay, the last time we did this was in February. So, we were due for one. Let me just get this in here. And we are starting off with 30 points instead of the 40 that we initially thought, because we're not supposed to add them up. It's just like you get the 10 points and then you move on to the 25 points. You don't get 10 plus the 25. Because if our max, like for example, on the vision and goals, the max is only 35. And we thought we had gotten the 35, but in reality, we only got the 25. Does that make sense?
So it's not adding, it's its own
Mhm.
score each time, right? That's
Yeah.
what I thought. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Because from our evaluation in February, it had that we had hit the mastering student outcomes, but after reading it, I don't think we did.
Oh,
It
I
was
see.
just the approaching and meeting that we
Okay.
combined.
Oh, you added together the approaching and meeting together? Okay, yeah. Okay, so you think we're at meeting student outcomes this time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I would agree.
And so we're for the competency of vision and goals. The board is in the meeting student outcomes focus category. We're trying to get to 35, which is the mastering student outcomes. And in order to do that, the board used a process that includes student, parents, staff, and community members in a way that leads them to express ownership of the adopted goals. Then the second one is around the interim goals. And then the last one is the board relied on a root cause analysis, comprehensive student needs assessment, and or similar research-based tool to inform identification of and prioritization of potential goals. So we don't have those root causes. And we haven't been able to go out to the community to express that they are owners of the goals. Would you agree?
That's fine.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
In the work that you did in setting the goals, when you met with each of the communities and shared what our data looked like compared to
Mhm.
the state, and you surveyed the communities to get that, do we do that annually to change the goals, or do we do that just once to set the goals?
We go out to get community engagement to set the goals, but also within our calendar, we're supposed to have our two-way communication. So we haven't been able to execute that. So that's why we haven't had this two-way communication of informing our stakeholders where we're at with our goals. Okay. So then we'll remain for the vision and goals, will remain at the 25. Moving on to values and guardrails. We are at the we're at the approaching student outcome focused. Let's see if we can move on to meeting student outcomes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas that we need to grade ourselves on. Let's see.
The last time the question was on the theories of action and whether we had adopted them. I know that I've seen them in recent things. I honestly cannot remember whether, but we're approving the board monitoring reports that include the theories of action. So then maybe yes. I'm gonna go yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So I got 1 out of 6 so far.
Oh, no, I meant I'm good with all the other
With-
ones. We
with-
were
we
good
did.
with all the other parts in that. The last time it was the theories of action
That was holding us back.
that
Okay.
was holding us back.
So then moving on to the mastering student outcomes.
I mean, if you still wanted those two-way communications, if you were holding that back from the last one, then I would think that that first part.
Falls under there too. All right, so then we're at the meeting student outcomes focus, so we're at 10. Let me just make a note, the two-way communication. Okay, moving on to the next competency, which is monitoring and accountability. We were at 0.
So we can't get 30 because that's 50% of the board meeting has to be monitoring goals. So the most we can get is 20, the meeting student outcomes. And then we haven't done the superintendent evaluations, so I don't know whether we can get meeting student outcomes or not.
Yeah, approaching student outcomes. I don't think we hit the superintendent is evaluated on performance regarding the goals, guardrails, and interim goals and
So
guardrails.
then we're still 0.
Yeah. Question, because I am gonna ask that we put the superintendent evaluation on our next meeting's agenda. But it's saying that it has to be evaluated on the percentage of the performance of the goals and guardrails, but we haven't adopted that evaluation tool yet. The SOFG evaluation tool.
Then we're just gonna stay at 0 in that category until we do it all.
When would you, Dr. Gonzalez, when would you predict that we could adopt the SOFG superintendent evaluation tool?
I would think we would be able to adopt it beginning, if the evaluation is in July or June 25th, I would assume that we could start July 1 with the SOFG evaluation tool. And that way we're continuing to move forward with that.
Okay. Can you just double check with our governance coach to make sure that you're within the allotted time? Because I know that it's supposed to be a year of monitoring and I feel that it has been, we've just completed the year.
I would agree. And I did speak with our coach today, our monitoring coach this morning, and his feedback for us was extremely positive. And he felt that the monitoring aspect of the work that we're doing is actually an exemplar for other people. And the district that he was most excited about and had held up as an exemplar for us, he's now holding us up as an exemplar for them. So I feel like we've got the monitoring parts down and we are getting better at being able to get deep into the data and the ways in which we're thinking about this. So I think he'll be very comfortable with us moving forward, but I will double check.
Okay. So seeing that that's our hindrance for monitoring and accountability, it's going to be the SOFG SUP evaluation. Okay. So we will remain at 0. Communication and collaboration. We're at 0 currently.
So this is the one that includes a policy diet. So we haven't done that, so we wouldn't get the 10. And last time we didn't get the 1 because we didn't have those time use trackers done, but they are being done now. So I'm gonna go with 5 meeting student outcomes focus. Unless you want to consider the edit to the agenda that was made to remove this evaluation.
Wait, what?
So the last paragraph in meeting student outcomes focus says the board made no edits to the board's scheduled meeting agenda during the meeting and during the 3 business days before the meeting, unless a state of emergency was declared. We have done that twice in the last month. So,
Okay,
yeah,
so we're at 1.
yeah.
The bullet point before that one, that's the policy diet one you're referring to?
Mm. Yeah. Or in the next column, it's the board has adopted few enough policies that the full board as a whole is able to review every policy at least once. So it's that few enough policies I thought was policy diet, but maybe it's that one too. Yeah. Yeah, limits the policies to require, yeah.
Okay. So we're at 1. Unity and trust. We're at 0. And we needed to adopt our board operating procedures and approve board members on committees. We have not done either one of those, correct?
No. Okay, we did something about committees, but I don't remember whether it was just a board update.
But we
No.
need to approve, right? We need to put that on the agenda.
Yeah.
For the board operating procedures, we did have that scheduled for a study session. Would you, Dr. Vink, would you be available during the summer for a study session?
It's highly unlikely.
Okay, because then we're gonna be stuck in this
I
category.
think that's just probably what it is right now. Yeah.
Well, the board operating procedure manual was shared. Have you had the time to look at that?
I have not.
Okay, so we'll just, for the unity and trust competency, we'll just stay at the 0. And we'll need these 2 items to move forward. And lastly, the continuous improvement. Which we were missing our self-evaluation, adoption of our self-evaluation results, which we did a couple months ago. It was in the consent agenda.
And then we still haven't participated in a team training where all members were present. So we're still at 0.
Yeah, we're still at 0. The governance team, because I also recognize that the governance team is the board superintendent and the board secretary. And at our board retreat, we weren't able to have the whole governance team there. Okay, anything else? All right, that keeps us at 0. So our points, we're at 25, 35, 36. Congratulations, we're at 36. And it's ideal for us to get to, within the first 2 years, to get to 40. So we're pretty close. Yay. All right, thank you, everybody. Okay, we did that. Well, it's not on the agenda, so we can adopt it. Yeah. Okay, let me put that on my list. Self-evaluation. All right, this concludes our student outcome focused governance time on the agenda. We're moving on to community communications. Do we have any?
We do not.
Thank you. Moving on to the consent agenda. May I get a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Alicia Vink, so moved.
This is Carmen Trujillo. I'll second.
Roll call for Ms. Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
Dr. Alicia Vink,
Aye.
and Ms. Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you. We're moving on to our action item, which is receive, discuss, and take possible action to approve policy advisory number 787, policy IJNDB. This policy is the use of technology resources in instruction, policy BGB. Any discussion? I know we received this policy support, but I also do want to recognize the technology department, MTS, you guys, for staying on top of this AI policy. I know that you guys have been working on this previous to this policy recommendation. So thank you, Lauren, Rocky, Randy, Mike. Thank you. May I get a motion to approve this, adopt this
I have a
policy?
question.
Go ahead.
Are we adopting these two items together? And that will be our policy, or is it just one supplements the policy that we're adopting?
You're adopting the policy, but the policy references the district guidelines. The district guidelines are considered a regulation. Those are not approved by the governing board, but the policy has to be approved.
Okay, perfect. So that's
The
not
guidelines
part
are
of it.
just for you to have, so you know that's what we are doing in keeping with the law, which is the policy.
I get that part. It's just that it comes on an ASBA paper and then there's a Phoenix L paper. So I just need to know which one is ours. Are they?
Once you approve the ASBA policy, then our regulations will follow that in our policy guide. So you'll see the policy and then you'll see the regulation that follows so that we know in Phoenix L, this is what we do in addition to what is outlined in the policy.
Okay, that makes a little bit more sense. Thank you.
If you think of it, policy is what is stated as statute or law and set by the governing board. The regulation is the input that the district uses to meet that law or regulation.
I get it. It's just the way it was included on the agenda that confuses me since it wasn't an actual like policy draft, I guess. That's where I was confused since it came on an ASBA report or the email that we got.
In the board update?
Yes.
Is that, yeah.
Or however, I know it came via email and then we took it from there and put it there. So not knowing what it will end result look like, that's what was confusing to me. So thank you. It makes sense.
Can I get a motion to adopt the policy?
Alicia Vink, so moved.
Jessica Bueno, second.
Roll call for Ms. Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
Dr. Alicia Vink,
Aye.
and Ms. Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to our closing items. Do we have any board member requests? Okay, and hearing none, moving on to future agenda items. Any agenda items? I have two. Just how I mentioned earlier, the superintendent evaluation for next, what is it, the 26th, June 26th meeting? 25th, isn't it 25th on Monday? No, oh, 25th. June 25th. Okay. And to add our self-board evaluation for June on the consent agenda. Anything else? All right. I motion that the meeting adjourns at 6:51 PM.
This is Carmen Trujillo, a second.
Roll call for Ms. Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
Dr. Alicia Vink,
Aye.
and Ms. Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. This meeting adjourns and our next scheduled meeting is for not June 11th. This says June 11th in here. June 25th. Got it. 5:15. See you later. Bye.